The Pell Grant program is the foundation of the federal student aid program.
By far the most important contribution to the federal student aid system.
Senator Yearround Pell was the author of that program to ensure that low-income students would also be able to go on to college.
The landscape looked very, very different. The concept that low-income students or students who didn't have the money to pay for college should somehow also have equal access really didn't exist.
The expansion of higher education under the GI Bill enabled the tremendous economic boom during the post-war period. And Johnson saw that the GI Bill was running out because we were running out of GIs, and he essentially wanted to start a GI Bill for everybody.
Senator Pell himself was a very strong advocate of a GI Bill for everyone. So that was the vision they had: equal opportunity, give the money to the student, and let the student make choices in the education marketplace.
Prior to the Pell Grant, the aid went to institutions to give to students. With the Pell Grant, the dynamic changed.
There was some debate of, whether the institutions should have the controlling features with the programs and make the decisions.
The first big battle came when, with the proposal from President Nixon, from the paper of Alice Rivlin, that suggested moving the major grant program away from institution-based program, the SEOG program, to the BEOG program, the Basic Educational Opportunity.
Arrayed against that was virtually every other higher education organization that you could name. Their champion was Congresswoman Edith Green from Oregon.
Mrs. Green favored giving it directly to the colleges. The rest of us, successful conspirators, favored giving it to the students.
We've got different bills now. The bill out of the Senate, the Pell bill, the Green bill out of the House. So eventually there was going to have to be a conference to write the final act.
The Senate passed the Pell legislation, and the battle was joined in the House-Senate conference in 1972.
Mrs. Green had always won the conference committees because she did her homework. She was such a force as a person. But all of that changed with Senator Pell, and he had as his principal ally in this effort Senator Jacob Javits of New York. And so they became such a force, they were going to make the next conference committee a give and take.
That session of the conference committee lasted for 15 hours. And in that session, Mrs. Green was finally defeated, and her approach to student financial aid was replaced with aid based on students.
Senator Pell's goal was to expand Pell Grants to make Pell Grants more eligible to middle-income families at that time.
While we expanded the pool of eligibles, we did so with the idea that if you had a rising tide, it would raise all boats. And so he was trying to expand it to bring more people into it so that the Pell Grant program would have more support.
So they expanded the Pell Grant program in terms of who was eligible by using the formula to do that, but they didn't increase the funding, so the average grant wasn't able to keep pace. And we lost tremendous ground during the 1980s.
When Pell Grants were created, there was no thought given to independent students. The 86 amendments were the first time that there was actually any systematic thought about how independent students should be treated. In 72, that was really a dependent population that was attending full-time.
We finally came up with a simple, or relatively simple and clear definition of an independent student, which basically survives to today.
You know, much of the conversation about Pell Grants in 1992 and 1998 was about increasing the Pell Grant maximums, about ensuring that the authorization levels were higher to support the higher levels of need that we were seeing among students. Many people in 86, in 92, and in 98 saw the Pell Grant maximum conversation as a secondary conversation because the maximum has to be matched by then the funding, which comes later.
In the 92 reauthorization, one of the sort of hidden issues was the question of whether or not the Pell Grant would become an entitlement. Now, you have to realize that the political setting of the time, at that time, there was great consternation over the dominance of entitlement programs and the feeling that the last thing we needed to do was create another entitlement program. Despite that, the subcommittee and the committee reported out a bill which had a Pell Grant entitlement. We went to the floor and we did a vote count. And we sat there with the legislation and made a decision on whether or not to proceed. And I can remember both Pell and Kennedy standing there and sort of looking down and then looking back up and saying, we don't have the votes. We pulled that bill back and put out the bill that had Pell Grant as the appropriated program, in other words, current law. Senator Sam Nunn had been a staunch critic of the Pell Grant program and a critic of abuses in the Pell Grant program, a lack of achievement of satisfactory progress, and a feeling that students got Pell Grants and they could just get a Pell Grant forever and they wouldn't actually get a degree in higher education.
No one had been more offended by the student loan defaults and some of the abuses that were going on in the student aid programs than Senator Pell. And as soon as he found out about it, he conducted a series of hearings. A few years into this, one of the big threats that we faced that was outside of fraud and abuse was that more conservative Democrats coming out, mostly from the South, decided that the Democratic Party needed to get back to more moderate roots. So one of the things that they had proposed was to get rid of the federal student aid programs. At the end of the day, because of the very strong measures that we put in the reauthorization in 92, we ended up having the support of that whole group of Democratic senators who, had they decided the programs were too corrupt to continue, we might have not had enough votes to reauthorize the Higher Education Act.
We strengthened the satisfactory progress provisions in the 1992 amendments, and we also cracked down on how long you could hold a Pell Grant and made sure that that program was free of abuses.
We believed that we should start to think about how to use financial aid to reward those who had the best chance of being successful in post-secondary education.
So when the SMART grant program and the Academic Competitiveness grant program were implemented, this was evidence that people were concerned about whether students were actually prepared for college, whether they were taking a rigorous high school curriculum.
That required negotiating with 50 different states. That required student aid officers to collect transcripts and review them. So as a result, no one loved the program and it went away. It had a 5-year authorization and no one fought to save it. When President Bush was running for president in his first term, he promised that he wanted to actually create a larger Pell Grant program and to do it in exchange for for students to try hard and become college ready in high school.
The CCRA really was born out of, I think, increasing anxiety, interest, and need for addressing affordability and a federal strategy around how to support our neediest students. And we had worked overtime through the entire 8 years of the Bush administration to raise the Pell Grant significantly.
We did have to sell this budget. The president's budget that put Pell increases in place was not an easy sell. The pay-fors were basically going after the bank-based loan program and some of the subsidies in it.
The other thing that sadly has gone by the wayside that we were very committed to is year-round Pell Grants. So why should a student be penalized for going to summer school? We want the students to get in and get out.
But the way the program was designed, it ended up costing much more money than anticipated, and some of the schools figured out how to game the system in ways that didn't work out so well for students, and we need to go back to the drawing boards and figure out how to accomplish the goals in a more effective and efficient way.
And we decided that it was more important to maintain the size of the award so students could access resources that would keep up with inflation, as opposed to maintaining the year-round Pell program. And that would allow us to save literally billions of dollars. Again, not an easy decision, but the weighing of and balancing of the kinds of decisions that we had to make at that time.
Because of the recession, we were seeing a lot more people eligible for Pell Grants and a lot more people going back to college. So the cost of the Pell Grant program was escalating rapidly. One useful place to get the money would be reform the loan program so that we're not giving all this money to the banks. So really the savings from direct lending were pumped into the Pell Grant program and helped to prevent what would have otherwise been a cut in the grant.
We see the increases that have been made over the 5 years of the Obama administration, but there are still calls for cuts to Pell at the same time. The Pell Grant program, as important as it is, because of the way that it's structured, there are times when you can see a surplus in Pell, and there are times when you could see a significant shortfall in Pell, depending on the number of students that are accessing Pell and the size of the program for a particular year.
The growth in federal student financial aid, the Pell Grant program alone, has been quite substantial. I mean, far in excess of inflation, but it has not been in excess of the inflation in college costs, which has far exceeded any other measure of inflation, whether it's housing or medical care or anything else.
I think the thing that people need to understand about Pell Grants is that they aren't a luxury. Pell Grants are a necessity. I think if we look historically, at every critical moment, this country has provided resources to ensure our veterans, to ensure our low-income students and others have had access to higher education, because we recognize that it's the ticket to not only personal or individual security, but to the competitiveness of our country.
The population of students served by the Pell program has changed because the population of students in American higher education have changed dramatically. We now have the traditional student in American higher education is not the 18 to 22-year-old going right out of high school full-time. It's a very, very different world out there.
I don't think that the founders of the program envisioned how important the Pell Grant program would be for so many of the college students today. We need for lawmakers to understand that college is expensive. College is not expensive because of the Pell Grant program. College is possible for a wide variety of students because of the Pell Grant program.